everyone. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm with the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Education. Thanks for coming to our webinar series. I'd like to ask for everyone to please keep your videos off during the webinar today. We will be recording the webinar and making it available on the NRC FAHE website. As you'll see on the screen here, there's a link to the NRC FAHE website. If you're not already on our listserv, please be sure to go to the website, and on the very front page, there's a place that you can join our listserv. If you're joining us by phone today, you can also email me. My email address is amy.salazar, S-A-L-A-Z-A-R, @wsu.edu, and I can send you a link to join the listserv. Our next webinar, usually I do an announcement about our next webinar, but we actually won't be having one in December because there's a lot of travel and a lot of people taking time off and being out of town. So our next webinar will actually be in January. It's not scheduled yet, but once it is, I'll send out an announcement on the listserv to let everyone know about that and give everyone an opportunity to register. So for today's webinar, we will have our presenters present for about 35 to 45 minutes, and then at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers. And for Q&A time, I'll ask you to type your questions into the chat box. And if you can type them in as we go if questions come up for you, but I'll save them until the end, and then at the end, I'll read the questions out to our presenters and give them an opportunity to respond. Okay, so today we have two presenters. So our presenters are Dr. Nate Ockich. He's an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work. And Nate studies contributors of post-secondary education outcomes for youth with foster care histories. And Dr. Ethan Park is an assistant professor at University of Michigan School of Social Work, and he's an organizational and management scholar with deep interest in intra- and inter-organizational collaboration, cross-sector collaboration, and user engagement in service production processes. Nate and Ethan both work on the CalYOUTH Study, a multi-year evaluation of the impact of California's extended care policy on outcomes for youth in foster care. So I will hand the presentation over to you all.
All right, great. Thank you, Amy. Let me just get the screen up here. All right, as Amy mentioned, my name is Nate Ockich, and I'm here with my colleague, Ethan Park. We both represent the California Youth Transitions to Adulthood Study, which we call CalYOUTH Study for short. And let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. And so we're here to present some early findings on the role of extended foster care, education training vouchers, and campus support programs on post-secondary education outcomes for young people in foster care. All right. So I'd like to start off first just by acknowledging some of the funders and partners that made CalYOUTH Study possible. CalYOUTH Study is really supported by a grouping of different funders and partners called the California Child Welfare Co-Investment Partnership. It includes the California Department of Social Services, the Director of Child Welfare, Welfare Directors in California, and then a number of funders that are listed here. And before we get into the actual presentation, I'm going to give a quick overview of the CalYOUTH Study. So the CalYOUTH Study began in 2012, and it's slated to go until 2020. And the main focus of CalYOUTH is to evaluate the impact of California's Foster and Connections Law that extended the age limit of foster care from 18 to 21 in California. And we're doing this by looking at a range of outcomes and looking at it and using a range of data sources. Principal investigator for CalYOUTH is Courtney, and CalYOUTH Study really includes three parts. So the first part is a longitudinal survey of young people in California foster care. This sample includes young people who were between 16 3/4 and 17 3/4 back in 2012, And these were youth who were in child welfare supervised foster care for at least 6 months. So far, we've completed 3 waves of survey collection. Wave 1 was completed in 2013 when young people were 17 years old. We had a 95% response rate and were able to interview almost 730 young people. We followed up with the Wave 1 responders in 2015 when they were 19 years old, and we had an 84% response rate at that point. And then finally, we completed interviews in 2017 when the young people were 21 and had an 84% response rate. We're also currently in the field right now for a 4th round of interviews. We're collecting data on the young people in the 23, and this is significant because one of the things we want to see is whether or not some of the effects of AB 12 or extended foster care law in California, does it last after young people have left care and been out of care for a few years? All right, so longitudinal survey is the first part of CalYouth. Second part is analyses of state administrative data. And so we're working with a sample of over 110,000 young people in foster care. We're in California foster care between January 2006 through 2017. And they were in care at age 16 or older. And what we've done is we've linked these young people to a number of other administrative data sets, including public benefits, data on college, which is what we'll be using in this presentation. And then finally, the third component of CalYouth includes surveys of child welfare workers who work with young people who are in foster care, particularly those who have reached or are reaching the age of majority. We completed 2 surveys, one in 2013 and one in 2015. And today's presentation, you'll see that it's broken down into 2 parts, and we really rely on all 3. We're going to be using all 3 sources of data in our presentations. All right, so for the presentation today, part 1, which Ethan is going to present, part 1 is going to be looking at the impact of AB 12, which is California's extended care law, on foster youth postsecondary enrollment and persistence. Then I'll take over for part 2, and we'll look at the roles of campus support programs and the Chafee grants, or the ETV grants, on postsecondary persistence. Part 1, we're going to be using the large administrative data that I just talked about briefly. And then in part 2, I'm going to be drawing on data from the longitudinal youth survey. So at this point, I will turn it over to Ethan. Pick it up.
Hi, this is Ethan. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, nice. So I'll present a study on the impact of extended foster care on youth post-secondary education outcomes. 2008 Fostering the Connections to Success and Increasing Adoption Act gave states an option to extend the age limit of foster care up to 21st birthday, and California is the early adopter of this measure. Assembly Bill, or AB 12, was passed in 2010 and enacted on January 1st, 2012. So far, about 28 states and Washington, D.C. have adopted this measure. Participating in extended foster care can really benefit from the services and training, such as subsidized housing and access to child welfare professionals. They can better prepare them to enroll and persist in the post-secondary education institutions. So, but at the same time, to this date, little research has evaluated the impact of extended foster care on early college outcomes. So, in today's presentation, we plan to answer these 2 questions. First, whether youth eligible for extended foster care or youth turned 18 on or after January 1st, 2012 were more likely to enroll, persist, and complete more semesters than youth who were not eligible for extended foster care who turned 18 before 2012. So second question is, do spending more time in the extended foster care increase the likelihood of youth enrolling, persisting, and completing more semesters? So our sample comes from the California Child Welfare Administrative data. We were mainly interested in the outcomes of about 76,000 transition-age foster youth in California who were in care after their 17th birthday and turned 2006 and 2013. So we draw a stratified random sample of about 22,000 youth. This sample includes about 17,000 youth in child welfare supervised placement and about 5,000 youth with only probation supervised placement. So given different characteristics of these two groups, we ran analysis separately for these two groups. The analysis of persistence and completed semesters included only about 8,600 youth who had enrolled in college by 21. We used multiple data sources for this analysis. Data from National Student Clearinghouse, or NSC, provided youth college enrollment and graduation records. Recognize that there are some coverage gaps in the NSC records, and we will discuss this in the limitation section later. California's Child Welfare Administrative Data, or CWS-CMS data, provided youth foster care history, substantiated maltreatment history, and basic demographic information. We also draw a college-level information from IPEDS, Integrated Postsecondary Education Data System. We also used the public use microdata sample data from census to estimate the county's housing affordability and young adult unemployment rates. Lastly, the CalYouth team members reached out to individual colleges in California to gather information on the college support programs operation in a given year. And our main outcome variables come from the NSC records. College enrollment is a binary variable indicating whether a youth enrolled in certification granting post-secondary education institution by age 21. Persistence is a binary measure of whether a youth persisted through their first 2 consecutive semesters by their 21st birthday. And the last one, the completed semesters, counts the number of semesters or equivalent length of study youth completed by age 21. And our main predictor variable is the AB12 eligibility, where youth was born on or after January 1st, 2012, and potentially eligible for extended foster care under the AB12 law. Timing care after age 18 is another predictor variable. The continuous variable captures the total number of months the youth stayed in foster care between 18th and 21st birthday. In California, youth were able to stay in care up to age 19 before the implementation of AB12, primarily for completing high school, which is a very important caveat here. We used the regression analysis to estimate the impact of AB12 and extended foster care participation on 3 education outcomes. And regression analysis allows us to control for various factors, individual level, county level, and college level factors that can influence our estimation results. We also ran more rigorous regression analysis to examine whether any uncontrolled and unmeasured factors biased our estimates, and the results are pretty much the same. And this is a list of control variables in 3 different levels. On youth level, we control topics, behavioral health issues, whether youth was ever incarcerated, and history of foster care and maltreatment. We also control for county's housing affordability, young adult unemployment rates on the year youth turned 18. Lastly, we control for education institutional characteristics such as selectivity, retention rate, and existence of a campus support program on the year youth enrolled in college. And here are some numbers. There are 2 significant differences between pre and post AB12 groups. First, youth turned 18 after implementation of AB12 stayed longer in the extended foster care, which was true for both child welfare supervised youth and the probation only youth. Second, the child welfare supervised group, the enrollment rate by age 21 significantly increased in the post-AB12 period by about 4 percentage points. Among youth who entered the post-secondary education by 21, there was no significant differences between pre and post-AB12 groups in terms of proportion of persistent youth or the average number of semesters completed. In general, compared to the child welfare supervised group, probation supervised youth had lower rates of post-secondary education enrollment, persistence, and they completed fewer semesters. For the probation supervised youth group, we did not find any significant differences by extended foster care eligibility status for the 3 education outcomes examined here. And findings from the regression analysis tells a very similar story. Positive relationship between extended foster care and college enrollment for child welfare supervised youth is the only significant relationship that we found here. After controlling for a wide range of factors, the probability of enrolling in post-secondary education was 3.9 percentage points higher for post-AB12 youth than for each additional year in extended foster care after their 18th birthday will increase the likelihood of enrolling by 4.0 percentage points.
Ethan, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. You're cutting out.
Just
to let you know.
All right. Do you want me to repeat, or I can just go on?
For about maybe 20 seconds. So
okay.
You can just...
And our finding must be interpreted cautiously due to multiple limitations here. NSC data do not cover all post-secondary education institutions, and the records about the 1,000 youth in the sample were blocked. They result in biased estimation of education outcomes. We also had limited range of individual level factors potentially related with the youth extended foster care participation and their post-secondary education outcomes, such as academic history and the performance in high school. Most importantly, our findings are really based on the data from the first 2 years of implementation of extended care in California. Many policies and supports now really characterize the extended foster care in California were not yet in fact or just beginning implemented by then. So despite these limitations, our finding also provides really strong evidence that the extended care increased the likelihood that child welfare supervised foster youth enroll in post-secondary education by their 21st birthday. But we did not find the evidence that the extended care increased the rates of persistence or the number of semesters completed by 21. So Nate will talk about the roles of campus support programs and Chafee grants on youth persistence outcomes from this point. Nate, you ready?
I'm ready. All right, let me back to sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Thanks for bearing with us. Ethan is in Michigan and I'm in Connecticut, and I know all of you are around the U.S., so thanks for bearing with us. So as Ethan just mentioned, the findings of the first analysis really do provide support for the role that extended care plays in increasing college enrollment, particularly for child welfare supervised foster youth. We did not see a statistically significant impact for persistence or number of semesters completed. And the second part of this study now is we're focusing on campus support programs and Chafee grants, which really are designed to specifically influence not just what happens when what happens after foster youth enter college, which they're basically designed to impact persistence. So we want to see does that play out. And just one thing to note, mentioned a little earlier, is California is an important state to consider. It's an important context, in part because about 1 in 6 to 1 in 7 older foster youth in the U.S. reside in California. So California has a pretty large share of the foster youth nationally. But just for a second reason as well is California has invested substantially, made some substantial investments both on a policy front and the funding front in campus support programs and Chafee grants. So evaluating these kind of new, innovative, progressive approaches in a state is important and also has implications for other states that may not be quite there yet. but they want to take a few lessons from California. All right, so some background, as I'm sure all of you are familiar with, Chafee grants, also called education and training vouchers. Foster youth are able to receive up to $5,000 a year, and this goes towards post-secondary education costs. Recently, the age limit was extended to 26 through a 2018 federal law. They can receive an ETV for a max of 5 years. It's been federally funded since 2001. About $42 million per year has been allocated to fund the ETV program. And in California, the state actually supplemented federal funding with state funding due to funding shortfalls. There were many youth who were eligible for ETVs and weren't receiving them because the federal dollars weren't cutting it. So they invested millions of dollars in state funding to supplement. In terms of campus support programs for foster youth, these are programs that are based on campuses and provide an array of services that are specifically geared towards young people in foster care to help them acclimate to college and persist through college. The first program that's known was established in the late 1990s in California. Currently, well over 200 programs nationwide, although we don't have an exact count. And there were some specific California laws that were passed in the last few years that fund a network of campus support program development and support, particularly in two-year colleges. This is important because many public four-year colleges in California already had campus support programs, and these laws provided the infrastructure to develop and support campus support programs in two-year colleges. And again, what's significant about this presentation is both campus support programs and Chafee grants, they're promising levers to boost persistence, specifically because they're targeted towards post-secondary education. Unlike the extended foster care program, which has a more broad focus, including education, these are really focused on getting foster youth through college. However, these programs haven't been rigorously evaluated. There's been a couple studies that have spotlighted or shown done some kind of light evaluation work on specific programs, but we haven't had more rigorous evaluations. So the two main research questions guiding this presentation, one, does receiving a Chafee grant increase the likelihood of foster youth persisting in college? And two, does participation in campus support programs increase the likelihood of persisting? So as I mentioned before, the sample comes from the young people who are participating in the CalYOUTH longitudinal study. And really we were interested in just the participants who had enrolled in college. So we obtained data from the National Student Clearinghouse in January 2019. And in those records, we identified 457 youth who had an NSC record. However, not all of them were included in our sample. There were 56 who were not included. 30 youth had blocked records. This means that either the youth or the institution basically didn't give permission to allow NSC to disclose data. So we don't know who those young people are, and we don't have data on their college outcomes. Then there were, with a little bit of investigation in our own data, there were 12 youth who first enrolled after the Wave 3 interviews. And we couldn't include those young people in our study because we're looking at the impact of Chafee grants and campus support programs on persistence, but they enrolled in college after we have information on them about whether they're participating in those programs. There were also 14 youth who appeared in NSC records, but they hadn't completed a high school credential when they were in college. So most likely these were young people who are taking adult basic education courses, and not courses that count toward a college degree. So our final sample for this analysis is 401 young people. There are many data sources. I won't go over each one of them in depth. The National Student Clearinghouse data is where we got the information to create our outcome measure of college persistence. And our college persistence measure captures whether or not youth made it through the first 2 semesters in college. We didn't count summer semesters, so first 2 non-summer semesters. California, the CalYouth interviews from Wave 2, Wave 3, and Wave 1. Gathered a lot of information from those. So from the Wave 2 and Wave 3 interviews, this is where we created measures for youth involvement in campus support programs and whether or not they received a Chafee grant. From the Wave 1 interviews when young people were 17, we collected a wide range of background variables that I'll describe a little bit later in a couple slides, and these largely served as control variables in our regression analyses. We also drew on child welfare administrative data to create measures of young people's foster care histories, maltreatment histories. We drew on the CalYouth caseworker survey to capture aspects at the county level, particularly around the county's engagement with post-secondary education institutions. iPads was used to capture information on the types of colleges that young people enrolled in, such as the college level persistence rate, the size of the institution, and so whether it was a 2-year institution or 4-year institution, and so forth. And then finally, the CalYouth team did a search in California to identify the colleges that had an existing campus support program. And we wanted to know, one, did the institution have a campus support program? And two, what years was the campus support program in operation? So we can basically time whether or not the young people, whether a campus support program was in effect at the time young people enrolled. And really this was used to as a check to young people's reports about being in a campus support program. So the main predictors of the study involve campus support program involvement and Chafee grant receipt. Both of these are binary measures, so a yes-no measure. As I mentioned before, they came from Wave 2 and Wave 3 interviews. And in terms of campus support program involvement, youth were asked if they had ever participated in a campus support program that was specifically designed for youth with foster care histories. We created 2 versions of this measure, one that was based entirely on youth self-report. So in the Wave 2, Wave 3 interviews, if they said that they were in a campus support program, we use that information. And then we created a second version, which was a sensitivity version, where we cross-checked youth who said that they were in campus support programs with the data that we gathered to see if campus support programs were up and running at that point. And that resulted in, I believe it was 14 young people who said they were in campus support programs, but at that time there wasn't a program up and running specifically for foster youth. So those 14 youth were moved from the yes category to the no category for that sensitivity version of the variable. Second outcome is Chafee grant receipt. And youth were asked if they ever received an education training voucher or a Chafee grant, and that's we coded that as yes or no. As I mentioned before, the outcome is college is persisting through the first 2 semesters in post-secondary education. And for young people who enrolled in institutions that didn't run on a semester system, it's only a small fraction of the young people. We converted those quarters or other marking periods into semester equivalents. So for this analysis, we used a type of regression analysis that's designed for binary outcomes called logistic regression. And the important part of regression analysis, for those who may not be familiar with these analyses, is it allows us to take into consideration differences in young people other than them participating in campus support programs and Chafee grants. So for example, if the young people who wound up participating in campus support programs also did better in high school and they differed in important ways that might influence their college outcomes, these statistical analyses, these regression analyses, allow us to take into account those differences and actually adjust our estimates of the role that campus support programs and ETVs play in persistence. So the results are going to be reported as odds ratios. And for those who maybe need to brush off the cobwebs or aren't familiar with odds ratios, if you see an odds ratio of 1.0, 1.0 is pretty much the center point. If we see an odds ratio of exactly 1.0, there's no impact. So for example, if you see an odds ratio for campus support programs of 1.0, that means that youth who participated in these programs versus youth who didn't, there was no difference, no impact at all on their chance of persisting. When we see odds ratios that start increasing, moving up away from 1 and towards infinity, then this means that participating in the campus support program or receiving an ETV actually increase their chances of persisting. On the other hand, if we see odds ratios that start to get into the decimal, starting to get into the decimals below 1.0, moving towards 0, this means that youth who were in campus support programs or received an ETV, they were actually less likely to persist. All right. We also investigated whether Chafee grants and campus support programs, if they had different roles in persistence for youth who were in 2-year colleges versus youth who were in 4-year colleges. And I'll briefly present those results after the main results. All right. So the control variables. I'm not going to go through all of them. There will be a test. Long story short is we controlled for a wide range of youth characteristics, college-level characteristics, and county characteristics, just to try to get more rigorous and accurate assessments of the role that CSPs and ETVs are playing in college persistence. These include aspects of the youth's demographic characteristics, their educational backgrounds, such as reading proficiency, their high school grades, which are self-reported, whether they're in special education, repeated the grade, and a number of other factors. We also controlled for a wide range of the aspects of their foster care history. If they were ever in congregate care, ever in kinship care, the age they entered care, the rate of placement changes throughout their care placement, and a number of variables that controlled for substantiated cases of different kinds of maltreatment. Controlled for a number of risk factors that were expected to possibly decrease the likelihood of persisting. We also controlled for protective factors, such as social supports, and if they had ever worked for pay. We also controlled for whether or not young people participated in extended foster care, and also their perceptions of the planning that they received around preparing for independent living, preparing for life after 18, which includes their college and work prospects. At the county level, we controlled for the size and urbanicity, the average available post-secondary education services and trainings that the caseworker believed were in the counties, how helpful these services were, and the collaboration between the Child Welfare Department and these post-secondary education institutions in the county. At the college level, we controlled for the type and selectivity of the college that youth were in, the first-year retention rate, percentage of students who enrolled part-time, percentage of students receiving the Pell Grant, and then expenditures on a number of types of student support and academic support and also instruction. And these are important because these are some things which very well may impact. Past research has indicated that where youth go to college plays a role on their chances of succeeding. So we wanted to make sure to control for those. And at the bottom, we list a number of other controls that you can read on independently. All right, so some initial descriptive statistics. In terms of enrollment, among the 401 young people in this study, we see that the overwhelming majority first enrolled in a 2-year college. Almost 90% enrolled in a 2-year college. And among those who were in 2-year colleges, nearly all of them were California public colleges. There were a couple exceptions. And about 5% of the young people enrolled in California public 4-year colleges, and then the final 6% of young people enrolled in other 4-year colleges, either private colleges in California or colleges outside of California. All right, so in terms of campus support programs that we identified from our search, we identified a total of 122 campuses in California that housed a campus support program. And among the public 4-year colleges, 29 out of 31 had campus support programs, so it's 94% of the public 4-year colleges. And almost 80% of the public 2-year colleges, 89 out of 114, they housed campus support programs. In terms of the main predictors and the outcome for this analysis, about 41% of young people reported that they received a Chafee grant. 52% reported that they participated in a campus support program. That's based on their self-report data. And then when we checked against whether or not campus support programs were in effect at the time, the percentage goes down a little bit, goes down to about just under 49%. And in terms of the percentage of youth who persisted through their first 2 semesters, we see that about 45% enrolled through their first 2 semesters. All right, so this table shows some abbreviated results from the logistic regression analyses. Remember, odds ratio of 1.0 is a center point. Odds ratios above 1.0 means that the odds of persistence is increasing. So the column on the left shows models where we had no control variables in there. So that we're just looking at Chafee grants and the outcome of persistence, kind of one at a time. And what we see is that for the Chafee grants, the odds of enrollment goes up by about 2.4 times for youth who received the Chafee grant versus youth who did not. Being involved in a campus support program was marginally statistically significant. It was under the 0.05 level for youth who enrolled in a campus support program. It was trending in the right direction. However, when we included that large number of statistical controls in our models, we see that the effects actually increased. And again, that's what this is doing here. These analyses are accounting for some of the differences between youth who received the Chafee grant and didn't, and youth who were involved in the CSP and didn't. So once we account for those differences, we see that the odds of persistence is about 4.3 times the odds for youth who received the Chafee grant compared to youth who did not receive a Chafee grant. So receiving the Chafee grant increases the odds of persistence. We also saw a smaller but still meaningful difference in participation in CSPs. So young people who were involved in CSPs, either based on their own self-report or also our verified reports, that increased their chances that they would persist through college. So main take-home points. Results suggest that both Chafee grants and campus support program involvement increased the expected odds of persistence. And these results were robust even after we accounted for many possible differences between youth who received these supports and didn't. These are early findings. They're promising. So far, we see that extended care hasn't shown to move the impact on persistence. That comes both from the findings that we have from this presentation, but also a few other studies have rigorously evaluated the impact of extended care on persistence and found similar things. It increased enrollment, but not persistence. The findings here about Chafee grants and CSPs are important in part because there's been substantial public and private investment, and it appears that they're having an impact, at least in the short run when we look at just persistence through the first year. Supplemental analyses that didn't show is we ran analyses where we looked at whether the roles that CSPs and ETVs have on persistence, does it differ between youth who enrolled in 4-year college and 2-year colleges? And we did not find statistically significant differences. So if youth are in 2-year colleges or youth are in 4-year colleges, receiving Chafee grants and participating in CSPs are having a positive impact on their likelihood of persisting. This is really important because, especially for the 2-year colleges, because as we saw that over 85% of young people in a sample first enrolled in 2-year colleges. Now, one thing which we do need to mention is appropriate degree of caution is warranted. This is one of the first studies to look at the roles that CSPs and Chafee grants have on persistence, and really we need to have more studies that are investigating this and also more rigorous studies. Which brings me to one of the first limitations. So these are analyses of observational data, right? It's not a randomized controlled trial of a CSP or a randomized controlled trial of education and training vouchers. Really, we're using observational data, and we're trying to control for as many things as possible. However, there may be some factors that differ between the youth that are driving the outcomes that we weren't able to measure, or we weren't able to measure completely, and this could potentially bias the estimates. So we didn't have specific dates available for exactly when youth received Chafee grants and when they participated in campus support program involvement. There is a possibility that some youth persisted and then received the Chafee grant and CSP. Didn't describe them here, but we ran a number of sensitivity checks and robustness checks to investigate whether this could have been was present and if this was influencing our outcomes, and we did not find evidence of that. And then as Ethan mentioned in the first analyses, NSC does have some missing data due to blocked records. We're not able to identify the youth whose records were blocked, but it certainly would be helpful to have those youth who were included in the study. All right, so if you're interested in CalYouth and in finding more information about the study and obtaining the reports, Ethan's presentation is actually already written up as a short memo. You can find it on the Chapin Hall website, which is listed here. And the results from the second part, the part that I just presented on CSPs and ETVs, this has not yet been published, but we're working on that and hope to get something out soon. And you can also check out information on the co-investment partnership that made the CalYouth study possible at the website that's listed here. All right, so with this that concludes our presentation, and Ethan and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you so much, Nate and Ethan. So I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to go ahead and type in any questions that you have, and as those come in, I'll read them out to our presenters. Okay, so the first question that we have is, what are some lessons learned from CalYouth that you think would be especially applicable for other states in terms of what key changes they might want to make?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So Ethan, I guess I'll start out, and if you have any other insights to add, please feel free to do. So I think one of the results that we're seeing so far is, in addition to post-secondary education outcomes, we assessed the role that extended foster care plays on a wide range of youth outcomes when they were 21 years old, so after they exited foster care. And really the main question is the amount of time in care spending time in extended care, does that help youth achieve positive outcomes or avoid negative outcomes? And there were some areas that we didn't find statistically significant impacts, but there were several that there certainly were. So things around education, such as completed high school, getting into college, around avoiding economic hardships, that was found, decreasing pregnancy, and a number of other results. So I think one lesson learned for the 20-plus states that haven't passed extended foster care, even though it is a considerable change that has to be made to the child welfare system, the evidence that's coming out so far is that it is beneficial to youth. And as the PI of the study commonly talks about, as the substitute parents, state assuming the role of substitute parents, is allowing your children to leave care at 18 versus 21? Is it something which ethically that most parents would do, a reasonable parent would do? And the evidence here suggests that extended foster care is having some impact on some positive outcomes. That, and the second major finding, at least so far, again, this is a preliminary, is that campus support programs and ETVs, it does seem to help foster youth not just get into college, but complete some college. And even if they make it through their first year, there's been studies in the past that have shown that even just having some college does have a benefit in the workplace, in terms of the chances of being employed and the amount of earnings that young people have. So I think these are just some things that other states can learn and hopefully implement. Ethan, anything else?
I guess one thing that I would like to add will be the importance of the county level factors. So we didn't find a significant relationship here, but in many other outcomes, like the behavioral health outcomes and the secondary education outcomes and the homelessness outcomes, I mean, we were able to find some of the a strong relationship between the youth outcomes and the county level service availability, intersystem collaboration, and those kind of factors. So I think that's kind of the early findings that we have, but at the same time, we oftentimes really miss those kind of environmental factors that can shape the experience and the outcomes of the youth.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the next question is, can you define CSPs? Are they foster youth focused, or do they serve generally I think this is supposed to say at-risk students?
Right. So The way that the question was worded is to the young people is there a program that specifically serves young people in foster care? We know that at some of the campuses they have an exclusive focus just on young people with care histories, but some of the programs in California serve foster youth and a broader student population, such as homeless youth and so forth.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, what differences do you find in your analyses between community colleges and four-year universities?
So one of the things which we didn't report here is just in general, and this is true in other studies too, is overall four-year colleges versus two-year colleges. Four-year colleges tend to have higher persistent rates for the general student body. They tend to invest more money in students on some of the expenditures that we measured on instructions and student support. And in addition, for the young people in this study, those who enrolled in four-year colleges had a greater chance of persisting in youth and two-year colleges. We didn't report those specifically here. That wasn't the focus. But in terms of the roles that ETVs and campus support programs play in two-year versus four-year colleges, we didn't find that one type of institution or another type of institution is having a particularly large impact, or these programs are having a particularly large impact in two-year colleges versus four-year colleges.
Thanks. So the next question, let me just read it. So the next question is about mental health and persistence. So it's what type of mental health challenges were foster youth suffering with that has to do with persistence? Do you have any information on that?
Right. So in this analysis, we included a measure of whether or not youth had a positive screen at age 17 from a standardized screening tool called, I believe it was CD-KID. I don't recall the name of the instrument particularly, but it's a self-administered screening tool for mental health issues, and we didn't find a statistically significant relationship between screening positive for one of the disorders that we saw and persisting. But we know, at least anecdotally, from programs that this is from campus support programs, is that some young people in college certainly do encounter mental health issues, and that's one of the important functions of campus support programs, to either to link young people and ensure that they have mental health challenges. But at least in this study, we didn't find that mental health was a significant predictor of persistence.
Okay, great. So our next question is, do you have any data to show persistence or beyond the first two semesters with the AB-12 and with extended foster care and Chafee? Yeah.
At this point, we haven't gotten there yet. In part because we need to wait a little bit longer. Some of the young people didn't enroll in college until recently, so we need to wait until we get a little bit. They've had a chance to be in college a little bit longer, where we can actually track their education outcomes a little bit further. But one of the next steps that we're planning to do in the CalYouth study, particularly around looking at the role that extended foster care plays in college outcomes, is we want to look beyond just the first year. We want to ideally look at degree completion, whether or not remaining in extended foster care leads youth to complete more degrees. But at this point, we just don't have the we don't have the data going out far enough to evaluate that.
Okay. And then the other question, or one other question is, do you hope to continue the CalYouth study past age 23?
Yeah. All right. Ethan, you want to take this, or would you like me to answer?
Yeah, take one.
All right. So at this point, our plan is that 23 will likely be the last interview wave. But we certainly, in terms of the interviewing the young people, but we certainly hope and have plans to extend analyses of CalYouth study beyond when the study officially ends in 2020. And this includes at the administrative level, obtaining information from more data sources, just to cast a wider net in evaluating the role that extended foster care has on education, but other outcomes as well. So I think age 23 interviews will probably be the last wave of interviews that we'll collect, but we'll continue on with work that comes out of CalYouth.
Okay. And I did just have another question come in. So the question is about race and ethnicity. So do you break down the data by race and ethnicity? Are people of color more likely to persist after receiving the grant?
Right. It's a good question. So we looked both at whether there were differences by race and ethnicity in the likelihood of youth receiving education and training ETVs and also receiving CSPs. And then we also looked at whether there were differences, race and ethnicity differences in the impact that these two programs had on persistence. And what we found is that there were no statistically significant differences. So youth across races were not different in their likelihood of participating in CSPs, and were not different in their likelihood of receiving an ETV. And in terms of persistence, the role that CSPs and ETVs played on persistence did not differ by race and ethnicity.
Okay, thank you. So the last question, I'll actually answer this one, is will the PowerPoint be emailed to us? So I'm actually going to post, I'm going to reshare my screen so that you all can see the website. So we won't be emailing out the PowerPoint. Oh, no, I can't find it. We won't be emailing out the PowerPoint, but it will be posted on the NRC FAHE website, which, sorry, I'm not able to pull it up right now, but the website is www.nrc-fahe.org. And on the website, we post we actually post recordings of all of our webinars, and we post the PowerPoint. So both of those will be available on the website within the next little while. So you can see today's webinar as well as past webinars. We did just have actually one more question come in. So Nate and Ethan, are you up for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. So it says, will you consider in the future studies to include the impact that middle school and high school college prep programs have had on enrollment and persistence in college, and also considering many of these programs that have expanded their support beyond high school with alum services, would you consider adding these points?
Yeah. It would be great if we had information on that. We're actually trying to get information on young people's secondary education enrollment and their high school grades. I don't know moving forward if we'll be able to have that get data on that specific information. But what we're hoping, again, one of the impacts of CalYouth on other states, not just in terms of promoting programs that support foster youth, but also increasing our ability to track exactly what that question was asking about. What are the long-term outcomes? And to do that, we really need a system to combine different data sources. So child welfare data systems with secondary and post-secondary education data systems and so forth. And some states certainly are making strides to doing that. And I think once we have those data linkages, that's going to be something which will give us a lot more information and power to answer those types of questions.
Okay, great, thank you. So one other person asked if I could repeat the website name. I was able to share my screen again. So that website is www.nrc-fahe.org. So please go there to look out for our webinar postings. And if you have any trouble accessing anything or signing up for future webinars, please send me an email as well. So thank you so much, Nate and Ethan, for presenting with us. We really appreciate you coming to present. And everyone, we hope to have you join us again soon for a future webinar. Thank you.